Welcome everyone. So in this video, what I wanted to talk about is fundamentals, but apply them to something that might be more rewarding in terms of their study. So far in past or prior videos, something that I've talked about quite frequently has been fundamentals. The use of basic straights, C, S curves. And I know a lot of people still find themselves wanting more study, or wanting more exercises, or wanting more of a focus on thinking about what we could really consider our primary language, mark making. So the straight, the C, the S curve, and then sphere, cylinder, and box are these things that we could study forever, right? And we could do it so long that we may never have a full and total grasp over them. So what we need to think about instead is that these are just a components of visual literacy. So to study them in isolation is weird. So let's instead apply them to something. As I mentioned in a prior video, I talked about drawing plants, right? Drawing nature as a way to break the monotony or the burnout that could be associated with figure and some of its difficulty. Or there are prior videos that are just on the exploration of the competency of making these and making them look accurate. But what they really are the components of how you will say anything. So they are what I would say is the components of visual literacy, or it's this is your vocabulary, right? This is something that you can say something with. So to study them in isolation would just be like getting really good at writing the alphabet, like just perfecting the A over and over again. That seems useless, right? It seems kind of silly when we put it that way. So instead, let's think of ways that we can use them that might still allow us to have some kind of engagement with the beneficial or like the productive development of accuracy and mastery or those types of things. But in this, we're going to look at how they might make a difference in the way you think through composition. That really, when we're looking at a picture, what we're doing is responding to the way that these different elements are getting used. So you could look at anything you like, right? You could look at comics, and I have in prior videos, where you can look at paintings and different sculptures or periods in history that you like. But I just think look at a lot, right? It doesn't matter what you look at or who you look at. Just don't look at the same person. I understand there's a cult of Sargent and amongst beginning art students. Anything but Sargent. How about that? Let's say, and you could look at anything but Sargent. But the goal would be to start to look at compositions and break them down for what we want to be studying, which is not just the components of of your vocabulary, the straight, the C, the S, your volumes, but what they're used to say, right? So let's take this one for an example. This is an Ingres painting, so it's 1800s. This is a bather, an image of a bather. Bather is a popular subject matter, and it's a whole genre, right, of paintings that you could study for what the content is. Like, why were these made? Why was there a whole genre of bathers? Isn't that bizarre? So that would be one way to study. What I'm advocating for in most of my videos is, what's the content, right? It's great to be able to draw something perfectly, but what is the use of that if we don't have something to say with it, right? So as soon as I identify an image that I like, maybe I go into the content. Well, what is this even about, right? Then we'll leave that aside for now because this is not a history lecture. But then the second level might be, okay, instead of just doing random studies on a page, what do I see in a painting or a comic? Well, number one, it's framed. Oh, okay, so what is the framing of this image? Well, here's the frame. This is probably something that we're so used to that we don't even consider anymore. You frame things when you take pictures with your phone, but it's so second nature that you don't think about the orientation of the frame. But we know there's portrait, there's landscape, there's things like this. So this would be a portrait style composition. And this is the field through which or against which visual components are integrated to give an experience, right? So the first thing I think about when looking through or trying to understand a composition might first be, let's say, one, what is it that unifies the composition? Right, so I'm still just going to be using these 6 elements up here. You can see all I've done to begin is I've made a box. So I'm never leaving the land of my basic vocabulary and its practice, but we're just trying to do something else with it other than constantly run it into the ground with exercises. So how is the frame oriented? What's happening inside? Well, the frame, if we look at it and isolate it, can be thought of in terms of having a skeleton. It has these different axes that separate that field. There's a vertical, which splits it in half. There's a horizontal, which splits it in half. And then there's diagonals, which would connect the corners and run through that center. And each one of those axes has a specific psychology that you can get if you exaggerate it. So for example, a vertical line always gives a feeling of stability within the composition. So this is to say that if I were to make an image inside this rectangular field and exaggerate constant vertical marks, that would give the overall image a unified feeling of stability. So this is, I'm just taking this, but we're trying to give some kind of content to pair with it. A diagonal, so that'll be something we'll look at later. A diagonal will always give the feeling of an active presence. Okay, this is an active line. This is why in gesture we always orient our asymmetrical curves on diagonals, because it produces that feeling of motion. And then the horizontal line will give a passive feeling. So here's your basic marks, your straights, oriented in different directions so that you can still practice that. But again, we're looking to break down the overall field or image. So this would be the, let's say, standard skeleton of a basic composition or its breakdown. But every era, right, every period in our history seems to enjoy a different type of formatting, right, or compositional foundation or skeletal structure. So for example, maybe in Renaissance paintings, there's a lot of stability and symmetry, a lot of triangles that design and build a foundation for the elements of the figures to be put over. And a triangle has that nice association to religion, right? The foundation, the 3 points. What we might see in here is a golden mean composition, right? Or something that favors the asymmetry of a design. So in this, I would look at, maybe there being a weighted structure like that. And this would be the unifying quality. It's not giving this basic symmetry of division like we see to the skeleton on the right. Instead, our focal point or figure is placed slightly towards the right side. And then the preponderance of weight at the bottom creates that division. So this would be a rough and dirty golden mean. It's a shorthand golden mean. There's no kind of measurement and kind of perfection of that mathematic ratio between the different rectangles there. It's just really kind of loose, which is fine, I think. But that's how I would divide this, right? So now I'm thinking of my straights giving that division there. And that seems to be where the focal point is. So what would be the impact of that? Well, this creates something that is weighted to one side. It creates, or the golden mean is usually associated with that most harmonious quality of presentation. So this, as a strategy of placement or breaking down your composition, gives you something that is with harmony. It also doesn't put anything on the center, right? So the center of your composition is usually that area that will weight it in a way that is distracting, right? Or usually we see things avoiding the center unless it's religious or political in nature. So Ingres' painting here has a nice avoidance of that. And that might be done, right? So I'm playing around with my fundamentals, but I'm thinking about them in a way that might also challenge me to study the delivery of content. So it's not just getting good at a straight, it's getting good at a straight for a reason, right? For the motivation that I want to be storytelling. Okay, so let's take that and add a little bit more now. So I have my basic breakdown, what I think the image is doing, but maybe over here I'll try to work it through a little bit more. So let's say we have our image. And if it helps, you can always put in that basic skeletal structure. But instead, I'm going to put in my golden mean. I think this is how the overall picture is divided up, right? Because again, if I'm going to, let's be a little bit better with our definition of what unifies an image. When I look to figure out what unifies an image, I'm looking for the biggest like gestalt presentation. So how is all the different subject matter organized that's in the image? And every composition is generally divided or organized around two things. There's something that unifies, and then there's something that provides variety within that. So when I'm looking for compositions or trying to understand them, right, which is all this is, because I don't know for sure the thought process of the artist and every artist that I look at. But what I've decided here is that what unifies for me, this picture, is the golden mean. And the reason for that is because this is a picture that is with harmony. It looks peaceful, it's calming. So I'm trying to connect my form to my content. Variety in a picture does or seems to do one of two things. It can provide support to what is unifying the image, so it can support the golden mean, or it can create contrast. And this would provide tension. So anytime I have contrast, I get tension in an image, and that gives a more dynamic feeling or a more tense feeling when those two things kind of are in tension, unity and variety. So this seems to be supportive, right? There's no kind of conflict between that nice overall golden mean. Everything is, if I go down my checklist, in support of that on the variety side. And that's what I would look to find, right? So when I start to, or when I feel ready, the next thing that I would look to do is maybe I'll begin to add my figure, right? So let's see how the figure sits, and then we'll decide if variety is created here, or instead, maybe I'm wrong and there's contrast. So what's the next thing we could do? Well, let's just do a little quick mock-up of the figure itself. So I'm saying that the figure starts here, and the head is looking this way. I'm trying to do these relatively small so that I'm not putting a lot of investment into the image itself. Remember, I'm not looking to create a finished work. But the other reason for this, video is there's a lot of emphasis in questions and comments on, still playing around with fundamentals. How can I get better? What can I do to increase and improve here? And the other is on, in terms of what we're looking at here, is why are we doing construction? Like, what is the reason for construction? Why are my figures being made into boxes? And I'm so tired of it. It looks mechanical and it looks robotic. Well, it's not about that. The construction of the image or an image is really just about practicing any quality of analytical thinking. So let's say it's about being analytical. And that's just so you can get in touch with the reason for doing. Drawing is a form of thought, right? That's really what it is. And it's always most interesting to me when the mechanics of thinking are laid bare. So construction is anytime you want to be thinking through a subject. The result may be a box. The box is telling you about space and its relationship to space, the figures, but it isn't an end aesthetic, right? The aesthetic itself that's not the finish. It's to participate. It's to encourage you to participate with a larger history of thinking or a larger kind of overall organizational quality in the drawing. And that's all I'm doing here. So maybe the next step is figure. But what I'm noticing with figure is it's distorted, right? This is, it's not as distorted as some of the stuff I look at that's maybe comic in terms of its orientation. But this doesn't look like a realistic body. The forms of the figure are really soft. There's not a lot of hard angle. So what I might start to think of here is what's happening with shape, right? As our components of storytelling or our components of artistic vocabulary are the 6 above: straight, CS, sphere, cylinder, box. But also I have line, I have shape, I have value, and I have color. So our larger field of visual literacy would be all of these things. I'm just focusing on line and shape for this video, but I think you could clearly make a jump into value and color on your own. So if I look at shapes, well, what are the shapes that are being used? In other words, are there any sharps? Are there any boxes? What's the quality of spheres? What decisions have this artist made and why? So I'm saying it's mostly that. This figure is mostly long, passive, rhythmic shapes. And then the next, the obvious question or next step would be why? Well, why is it that the figure is distorted for these long, flowing, almost Gumby-like forms? You could make your own, assumption. But this is a woman who's being watched from behind, so that involves some degree of voyeurism on the part of the viewer or us. It's a bit sexualized. All of the forms of the figure here are meant for kind of a passive consumption. It's not Picasso's, damsels, right? The graphic and very aggressive tribal-looking women. Right? It's the opposite. It's softcore. This is a woman, in the process of bathing. As viewers, we are meant to feel non-threatened. Right? So the body here is comprised of non-threatening, elongated shapes, which have a degree of making the body feel a bit more passive and semi-sexualized. Right? That would be my basic assumption for the way that form, in this case, shape, delivers content. And then my next step from here would be to say, well, does variety in that sense support or create contrast with the unifying element? I think that supports the feeling of harmony that this image delivers. Otherwise, I can see that there's an avoidance of the center, so that keeps me out of a symmetrical image. And then I can start to look at some of the supporting material, like what is the background and environment doing? Which is great, right? Because we should all start drawing environments and figures in space. And occasionally what I'll do that you could see me is I just add a little bit. So maybe I made that figure a little big. So I just increase the size of my canvas if that's the case. I mean, ideally I'd get it right, but nobody's perfect here. So let's look at some of the other things that are taking place here. I've looked at shape of the figure and placed that. Made some observations about it, but let's look at the elements around. So things that stand out to me, and I'm just going to work clockwise, maybe from the head around and back to the head, examining the space of the figure. We'll look at this diaper fold, this curtain that's behind her. The first thing that does is it closes off the space behind her. Now, why is that important? Well, closing off the space makes this a more intimate, shallow space. There isn't a rolling hill and landscape or scene behind her. So there's more intimacy. So the use of space in terms of the shallow area of the figure builds back to my main theme. So the other thing that this drape does is it pulls my eye into the body. So that line adds to the overall. There's some pipe folds here that drop. And that has a nice quality of keeping my eye inside, but also bringing it down. The bed and pillows behind also pull my eye in towards the figure, the bed. So I'm thinking of, again, it's straights, it's C's, it's S curves, but I'm now organizing them in a way that helps tell the bigger story by thinking first of unity, big picture gestalt of the whole, and then in a micro way, working through the components that stand out on the surrounding space to give that sense of variety. Like, for example, look at the way the bed's designed. And I'm going with the presumption here that, it wasn't just photocopied. It's not a photoreal painting an image. Everything here is constructed for a reason. So look at the folds on the sheet. They bring my eye back. but they also sit nicely in this kind of bottom space of the golden mean. The drop of the bed at the bottom, right? So we'd say maybe this is the area of the folded, crumpled area of sheet. In a way, all of this is sympathetic and formed to her body too. It feels like the same shape. It's soft in the same way. And then this drop of the bed sheet here, frames the bottom of the picture. The curves bring me out and into the leg or the foot. And then there's enough at the bottom that is dark, that it's value, that prevents me from leaving. So one thing I always look at this stage in composition is how are the corners treated? Usually I see corners avoided, right? So there's some kind of visual element that pulls me away from corners. So maybe we have some lines, or what I often see, and seeing quite a bit in here, are lines treated as repeated themes, like almost gesture-like, to help pull our eye, animate our eye away from an area or into an area. That might bring me across the image, right, to the other side of the body, where we already organized, to this drape. And this is a really interesting shape. This shape is harsh. It's one of the darker shapes. It's a series of pipe folds that kind of descend and fall. But this gives the experience of, I would say, further intimacy. This looks like the curtain behind which she's completed or finished bathing or is getting ready to bathe has just been pulled back, right? So this has just been yanked back, and it's kind of cropped somewhat and resting here. But that gives us another level of framing, right? So there seems like continual frames in this that help me feel like I'm in an intimate space with this person. And then from here, right, that crops kind of the scene into the figure even more. And then we have the diaper folds doing the same thing on this side, kind of bringing us in and towards the head. And that would be good enough. So what I take from this image is that while using my fundamentals, there's a unified scene on the golden mean that's proposing some kind of harmonious field. Within that field, shape and line support it by creating rhythmic forms, right? So forms that are pleasing and non-confrontational. They're not graphic or sharp, that are on the environment or the space side, supported by rhythms, lines, repeating themes that pull my eye back into that figure and enhance or support that feeling of greater intimacy, which is, I think, the overarching theme to this image. So hopefully that gives you a bit of further emphasis on the fundamentals, but also challenges you at the same time to think and practice them in a way that always pairs them to content and not to just the rote study of how much straighter can your line be.